I'm going to read through Search for My Tongue by Sujata Bhatt. This is in preparation for your Edexcel IGCSE English Literature exam, paper 1. So the title, Search for My Tongue, suggests that the poet is in search for her identity, potentially, or to recover her identity. If she's searching for something, she feels like she has lost something or lacks something. And tongue, you could argue, relates, or at least it does in this poem, to language, which has real close links to your sense of identity. So the first stanza. You ask me what I mean by saying I have lost my tongue. I ask you, what would you do if you had two tongues in your mouth and lost the first one, the mother tongue, and could not really know the other, the foreign tongue? You could not use them both together even if you thought that way. And if you lived in a place you had to speak a foreign tongue, your mother tongue would rot and die in your mouth until you had to spit it out. I thought I spit it out, but overnight, while I dream. So straight away, Bart uses direct address with the pronoun you. So she immediately engages the reader, but more than that, she's inviting you to imagine what it's like. So I feel like her intended her intended reader is someone who does not speak two languages. I think she's trying to encourage those who haven't had that experience to try and understand what it's like to have two languages and to live in a country where you have to speak a language different to your first. So it engages the reader, but I think she's really trying to encourage the reader to understand her situation, hence why she asks, what would you do? She's encouraging you to imagine being in her position. She also uses the idiom lost my tongue. My advice is to search what idiom means if you're unsure, but basically an idiom is something that you say in your language that is commonplace, but if you were to translate that into a different language, it would not translate well because it's just something peculiar to that language. So saying I have lost my tongue, for instance, is an idiom. If you translated that into a different language, it might not mean the same. It might be completely meaningless. But what I think she does here is use it as an extended metaphor, and she looks at that almost as if she literally loses her tongue. In other words, her first language, and what feeling she has with that. Creating that image of two tongues in her mouth, so here where it's highlighted in blue, is a metaphor for her obviously talking about speaking two languages, but she wants you to imagine literally having two tongues in your mouth and saying basically that's as close as she can get you to imagining kind of the difficulty and the discomfort of speaking two languages. And so that's what she's trying to encourage there, for the reader to try and grasp just how difficult it can be sometimes to speak two languages. It's interesting that she describes her first language as her mother tongue and her second language as her foreign tongue. So instantly we have this contrast between the two tongues. The one, her first language, the mother tongue, clearly closely links with her identity, obviously who you are, and the way that the type of person you see yourself, you could argue is closely linked to your mother, and what you kind of inherit from your family. So she's trying to highlight how her first language really closely links to her identity, whereas the foreign tongue, using the word foreign in contrast to mother, makes it seem so alien to her. It's not something that belongs to her. It's not something that she can identify with. Going further down, she uses imagery of death to describe her first language, and her fear really that she's going to lose her language, So we've got rot, rot and die. The repetition as well of rot emphasises her fear that she will lose her first language, to the point that she'll feel like she'll have to spit it out. And again, she repeats, I thought I spit it out. You could argue that the harsh consonant sounds there mirror the struggle or the fight that her two languages have, which encourages again the reader, because I think that's what she wants to do, to appreciate how difficult it is to hold on to your identity, to hold on to your language, your first language. And then we seem to have a turning point here. I'll talk about the turning point when we talk about structure later. But overnight while I dream. And then the next stanza, as you can see, is in her first language, Gujarati. And she's also tried to translate how a non-Gujarati speaker could pronounce this. So again, I think that's interesting that she's included that translation. Again, I think she was really encouraging the reader to grasp her experience and try and experience it as closely as possible, because otherwise she could have just put the Gujarati at the top without the kind of phonetic way of pronouncing each symbol. So I think she's really, this isn't, I don't think, I've read a few interpretations online, and some interpretations see this as if she's being like critical of the world that she lives in and how it's affected her identity. I don't feel like it's that. I feel like she's really trying to share her experience with the reader. I don't feel any negativity from the poet, but that's my opinion, and you can have your own. Just make sure that you can convincingly support it. So then the following stanza completely contrasts with the first one, where we had all this imagery of death and this fear of losing her first language. But instead we have repetition. It grows back, a stump of a shoot, grows longer, grows moist, grows strong veins. It ties the other tongue in knots. The bud opens in my mouth. It pushes the other tongue aside. Every time I think I've forgotten, I think I've lost the mother tongue. It blossoms out of my mouth. So we have repetition of grows, obviously, which is a direct contrast to the imagery of death that we had before. We also have this floral imagery of life, a stump, a shoot, bud, blossoms. And again, that contrasts the image of death in the first stanza, but I haven't written it here. But also, it just seems she's describing her first language as really, really beautiful as well. Think about how beautiful the natural world is, especially in terms of like watching a flower grow and so on. So I think she's again trying to highlight the positive experience of realising that her language is still there, her sense of identity, if anything, is even stronger. I haven't highlighted this, but I should have. It ties the other tongue in knots. So there seems to be this kind of triumphant tone here that her first language has won, almost as if there was a battle beforehand. And her first language has completely overpowered her foreign language. And again here, it pushes the other tongue aside. Once again, it creates this image of this battle, but her mother tongue will always win because it's deeply embedded in her. It's her roots, which obviously links to this floral imagery. Her roots are deeply embedded in her. That's her cultural heritage, and no foreign language, no foreign identity can compete with that. Okay, so looking at the structure, form and themes and so on, so we've got 3 stanzas. The middle stanza, as we've mentioned, is in Gujarati. I think this helps visualise how the mother language floods back. So it's almost like she doesn't even expect it to, because in the first stanza she's so concerned about having to spit out her mother language, and then suddenly in the next stanza we have all this Gujarati. So I think visually it helps the reader appreciate how her language seems to just come back when she least expects it. You could call this a volta, which is a turning point, because here we have almost this defeated tone, with the repetition of spit it out, and the imagery of death, rot, rot and die. But overnight while I dream, so when she dreams it all changes, and then we lead on to the imagery in the latter stanza of kind of floral imagery of life and growth. So that's where I would argue the turning point is. And that helps create that triumphant tone, because we have that quite defeated tone at the beginning, and it's a nice contrast in the end to see her first language come back. There isn't any rhyme. It's, for me, I think it's more conversational or a serious tone. And there's a lack of meter as well, so that just creates uncertainty. And that's what she experiences with when she's in this foreign country, concerned that she will one day lose her first language, lose her sense of identity, her cultural heritage. So I would argue that the lack of meter, the lack of consistency in the poem mirrors her feeling of uncertainty. And then for themes, I've written identity, language, immigration and cultural heritage.